Why isn't this bird of paradise doing well? No, it's not the bird poop that's found on it. This is at a restaurant in San Marcos, one of our favorite restaurants, the Blue Dahlia. So the first thing I like to do when I see this is look at the backs of the leaves, and I can find pests immediately. You see mealybugs right there, and actually a spider mite as well. The soil is very, very dense. It retains a ton of moisture, and it always seems to be wet. So it's not drying out quickly enough, probably causing stress. The light is fantastic. I'm going to recommend treating the pest and let the plant dry out 25 to 50% between. This is the orchid from my most viral video ever, and I want to show you the difference between an orchid spike and an orchid root. So if we look down here first at the orchid spike, you can see how there's a little indentation right at the tip right there, kind of in two little mountains kind of a thing. There's also a little sheath that's coming out. Now let's look at that in contrast of a root. You can see it just comes to sort of a blunt point, and that's the difference between an orchid spike and an orchid root. Most people don't know that poinsettia are actually trees. They can also live in your home year-round. They don't just die after Christmas. They do need really, really bright light though. The red are not actually flowers. The flower is actually right in the center. Poinsettia are also euphorbia, and so is that, and that, and that, and that. So there's like, I don't know, 3 or 4 things that are really cool about poinsettia. My Thanksgiving cactus stayed outside all summer, so it's time to bring it in. We've been living out in our RV for about 7 months now. It's great, but they've also been doing construction right behind us for the past couple of months, so this bad boy was pretty dirty. I've been kind of doing it wrong. Actually, this was a cutting from my great-grandmother's cactus. My grandma, whose birthday it is today, shout out to her, happy birthday, she gave me this cutting, and so I need to take a little bit better care of it. Check out this t-shirt my wife came up with in my plant era. So after I cleaned it up and gave it a little bath and then patted it down, kind of cleaned off all that dirt, I came back and sprayed it down with a little bit of the We the Wild Protect. I keep my Thanksgiving cactus outside in full shade every year. This is really going to be an ideal lighting scenario for them, so they bud up come Thanksgiving. This is what's called etiolation. It's when a plant gets a little bit stretched out looking for light. So what's going on? The plant started very compact down here. You can see all the dead leaves were quite compact at some point. And as the plant has grown and not bright enough light, because these trees are blocking a lot of the view of the sky and the window is just quite narrow, the plant is stretching itself out, trying to look for more and more sunlight, trying to get closer to the light that it can see to compete for that light. And so it's getting a little bit stretched out. So what you want to do, if you want to kind of revert it back to its natural, more compact form, you would want to behead it. You actually want to cut it way down here and then just leave it be. It will grow more leaves and they will be compact again as long as it's getting the right light. But actually, if you ask me, I really actually like this form. It looks like a little bit of an art piece. So if you want to return it to its natural state, of course, yes, beheading it is the answer. But if you also enjoy it just the way it is, then just keep it that way. So you just got an orchid for Valentine's Day, but you don't know how to take care of it. The next couple minutes, I'm going to show you how incredibly easy these plants are. First things first, while they're in flower like this, it's perfectly fine to keep them in a medium or even lower light scenario for about a week at a time. I'm sure you want to keep them on display on your coffee table or kitchen island, which typically don't get very much light. But for long-term health, they're going to need very bright light. Make sure you put them in a south-facing window, a west-facing window, or an east-facing window that has a nice wide view of the sky. So if you know you have a really hot window, back them up a couple of feet, still maintaining a nice wide view of the sky, but you're going to avoid that leaf burn by backing them up off the glass a little bit. Next, let's talk about watering. First of all, never use ice cubes. These plants are tropical. They don't know that kind of cold. It's best to just use room temperature water. If you know your tap water is trash, you might want to use a more distilled water, reverse osmosis, rainwater, spring water, anything that's a little bit more pure. Now, you're going to want to let all of the roots dry out in between water. Everything is 100% dry, and then you soak everything 100%. Drought, flood, drought, flood. You can see here these orchid roots are very silver. Now, when I turn around in the pot and I look at all the roots, I want them all to be silver in between watering. Then, after I water, they should all be green. Just doing these 2 things, watering, appropriate light, will keep your flowers on the plant for a long time. Usually about 3 to 6 months, but I have seen them last for upwards of 12 months in between. Now, while these orchids are in flower, there's no need to fertilize. However, when the flowers fall off, it's not dead, but this is a good time to resume fertilizing. Once the flowers have all expired, you want to follow this bloom stem all the way down and cut it right near the base of the orchid. Now, you don't have to do this. Sometimes people leave the stems on. Usually when the last flower falls off, the entire bloom stem will brown up and die. But it doesn't always die. It's perfectly fine to leave it on if that's what you prefer. You have the possibility of more orchid branches coming off and it continuing to flower off the same stem. However, for the most blooms and the biggest blooms, I've found that cutting them all the way back in between bloom cycles is the best way to go. As far as repotting goes, we want to do that about every 1 to 2 years, or when the roots are coming out of the bottom drainage holes. You're only going to want to go up 1 pot size. Now, these don't use regular soil, okay? You're going to want to use orchid bark. You can use long fiber sphagnum moss, any combination of the two. You can do complete water culture, where this is sitting in water all the time. That's fantastic. You can do this in semi-hydro, where it's in leca. All of these methods of keeping orchids are perfectly acceptable. None of them are really better than the other unless you're trying to grow competition orchids. But that's going to do it for our orchid care video. Now you know how easy these are to grow, and you can enjoy them for a lifetime. Should you repot your plants during the winter months? My name's Tanner. My wife and I own a plant shop here in Prosper, Texas. Now I'm going to give you the information that you need to know and then tell you my recommendations at the end. So the reason people say don't repot during the fall and the winter months, it's not because of dormancy. Most houseplants don't really have a true dormancy. It's because repotting a houseplant is quite a bit of shock on a plant. And the number one thing that helps a plant recover from that shock is light. And during the fall and the winter months, we have less light, right? So it would stand to reason that we wait until our longer days of spring and summer months to repot our plants, because they're going to be able to recover from that shock in a more timely manner. You don't risk much decline on your plants. Now, the truth of the matter is, for most houseplants out there, if you were to repot your plants in the dead of winter, you're going to see very little, if any, decline at all. But then for some plants, you are going to see a decline. So it's much easier to just say, don't repot during the fall and the winter months, because we know that plants do not decline from the size of pot they're in. Unless it's an emergency, there's no real reason to subject your plant through the shock of repotting during our shorter days of the winter months. If we can just wait a couple of months until the spring to repot our plants, that's going to be a much better situation for them. Of course, unless it's an emergency. So that would be my recommendation. Unless it's an emergency, it's better just to wait until the spring and the summer months to repot your plants. Here's how to get your holiday cactus to bloom. Now, we've got a Thanksgiving cactus right here, indicated by the leaf shape and the bloom. The most important aspect of getting this plant to bloom actually takes place in the spring and the summer months. You have to put it in bright light, so make sure that your plant is seeing a nice wide view of the sky. Now, I like to put my plant in a full shade scenario outside, as long as it's above 50 degrees, and I can guarantee the plant is going to get enough light. Next up, let's talk about watering. These are tropical cactus, okay? So they're going to need a little bit more watering than a desert cactus. You don't let them go 100% dry. I like to water them when they're between 25 and 50% dry. I use a little knitting needle. I'll gauge when it's about 50% dry or 25% dry if it's the spring and summer. I put my probe in there. I bring it out. I can see that it is still wet, at least 50% down, so this would not be ready to be watered. We fertilize with a general purpose houseplant fertilizer throughout the spring and summer months, or you can use an organic fertilizer year-round. That would be fantastic. Now, let's talk about getting these to bloom, because there's a lot of controversy around you have to put it in a closet, you don't have to put it in a closet. These plants are photoperiodic, which means they're going to need some extra darkness in order for them to flower. Now, this is naturally going to occur just because we have shorter days in the winter months. So you don't have to put it in a closet. But if you want to get the most blooms, yes, you would want to have a pure dark scenario for like 12 hours at a time. So if you want to get like the most flowers, if you're trying to enter a competition or something, yeah, go for that. If you've got those little flies around your houseplants, here's why they're there, and here's how to get rid of them. Now, first of all, these are called fungus gnats, okay? So let's say you've got fungus gnats going on. It's important to know why you've got fungus gnats. The reason is because usually you establish a watering system during the spring and summer months, and you're carrying that on into the winter. Your soil is staying too wet for too long, and those fungus gnats are coming in and laying their eggs right there. Let's talk about how to get rid of them. The first thing I want you to do is get some of these yellow sticky traps. Look at those right here. Now, this is how we're going to take care of the adults. The adults are flying around. Those are the ones that are annoying. You're going to go right here. They're attracted to the yellow right here. They're going to stick on here, and that's how we're going to get rid of the adults. Now, one thing you can do to reduce the likelihood that you're going to get fungus gnats is just reduce your watering. At least let that topsoil dry out in between watering. Now, the lifestyle of or the life cycle of a fungus gnat, rather, is about 5 weeks. So they're not done just with the yellow sticky traps. The next thing I want you to do is get some mosquito bits, okay, right here. Now, we're going to pour in some here. I'm sure there are some directions, but we'll just put some in our water right here. You let it stoop, I think, for about 30 minutes, give or take, and then you're going to water in your plant with the mosquito bit tea that you can see right here. And that's going to kill all the eggs and the larvae that are down here in your soil.
Now, we have to keep up with that for the next 5 weeks. Every time your plant needs watered, I want you to water with this mosquito bit tea. That's going to kill the fungus gnats at every single life stage. Now, finally, what I want you to do, this neem oil from We the Wild, the Protect from We the Wild, is fantastic at killing the food source that the fungus gnats are eating in the soil. So take your We the Wild, spray it on the soil surface, and this is going to take away a food source and make the plant undesirable, uninhabitable for those annoying little fungus gnats. Here are 5 tips for your first winter with houseplants. The first and the biggest thing that's going to change in the wintertime is your light. You can see it's quite dim behind me right now, which is a characteristic of the winter. Not only do we usually have a lot gloomier days in the winter months, but we also have much shorter days, and light is the most important factor of houseplant care. So you might have to move some of those plants that are farther removed from your window to a little bit closer, just because we have shorter days. So they need that brighter light in order to get enough light to make it through the winter at a healthy state. Your watering needs might change in the winter months. Now, this could be more watering or less watering. The biggest mistake that I see is that people get a schedule. They buy a plant in the summer months when our days are really long, and they water every 7 days, and they continue with that schedule during the winter months when our days are much shorter and the water processing time is much shorter. If you're up north where it's much, much colder, you might have to water more frequently. The wood stoves, the heaters going all the time, they can dry out your plants pretty darn quickly. So you might find out that they're a little bit more thirsty. You might notice that the growth slows down on your plant. Now, the reason your plant might get slower growth in the winter months is, again, because we have shorter days. Shorter days means less light means slower growth. So don't be alarmed if your plant isn't growing a whole bunch. We'll wait until spring and summer for that. I want you to wait until the spring to do your repotting. The reason is because we know that plants do not decline because of the size of pot they're in. I actually prefer to go into the winter months a little bit root bound with my plants because they're going to dry out faster, and we lower the risk of root rot, which is especially high during the winter months, our shorter days.
You have to cut these leaves off, and let me tell you why. Plants are all about balancing energy, and right now all of the green that you can see on these leaves are creating energy. They're also consuming energy, but these 3 leaves right here that are super pink, they're about to turn white, and this white leaf right here are only taking energy away from the plant. And what I mean by plants, you need a good balance, is that most of the leaves on the plant need to be photosynthesizing in order to maintain the health of a plant. So whenever you have plants or leaves that are just taking energy away, but not contributing any energy, it's kind of like a group project where you're the only one that's doing any work, and all the other 3 are, it's usually in groups of 4, are freeloaders, right? So we need to get rid of those freeloaders. So what we do, we come in with our pruners, maybe take a picture because they're actually really nice looking, and then you just give them a little prune. Follow them all the way down to where they come out of the vine or out of the soil, and you give them a little cut. And actually, the risk is, so you can see these were the previous 2 leaves, and then this was the newest white leaf, or one of the older white leaves that came out. Every new leaf after this, like this one after here, is going to be white again. And if enough white takes over, you have more than 50% of the leaves only taking energy away and not giving any energy in return. The plant could eventually kind of...
If you're the type of houseplant person that likes really pretty leaves and really pretty flowers, the Hoya sigillatus might be for you. Hoya sigillatus are ridiculously easy to take care of. Let me show you what kind of light they need. Let's say I want to set my Hoya down right here in front of my south-facing window. I recommend south-facing, west-facing, or east-facing if you're in the northern hemisphere. Open up the camera app, and I want to set my phone exactly where the leaves are on my Hoya. Snap a picture, and this is what you want your plant to be seeing. You see all that nice blue sky? That is what bright light is. Let me show you a watering trick with your Hoya. We want these to dry out about 50% in between watering. We always have drainage going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knitting needle, I'm going to put the point right about halfway down the pot because we want it to dry up about 50%. I'm keeping my thumb right here as a marker as to where the top of the pot is, and then I'm just going to insert my knitting needle all the way down until my thumb hits the soil. Now when I bring it out, let me show you what I'm looking for. You see that soil that's stuck to the knitting needle right there? That tells me that the plant is not yet 50% dry. So I'm going to hold off on watering. I'm going to check back in a few days and wait until I put my knitting needle down about 50% and no wet soil comes out on the knitting needle. You either fertilize these with an organic fertilizer year-round or use a general-purpose houseplant fertilizer through the spring and summer months. You can let it trail, you can let it climb, but with those 3 instructions, you're going to have a happy, healthy Hoya. And the Hoya sigillatus is available right now on my TikTok shop. This is a houseplant that's perfect for somebody who wants to start collecting but doesn't want collector care. The Philodendron burl marks has these really beautiful leaves with the awesome variegation we have going on right here. And what I mean by a collector plant without collector care is a lot of those higher end collector plants require really high humidity, special circumstances, etc., etc. If you've had success with other philodendron, you're going to have success with the Philodendron burl marks variegated. You want to make sure you give them bright light. They need to see a wide view of the sky. Let me show you what I mean. Wherever you decide to set your plant down, setting my phone right here where the plant's leaves are, and I'm taking a picture of the nearest window. And this is what I want you guys to see. Look at all the unobstructed blue sky that we're seeing. This is a fantastic lighting scenario for your philodendron, not only the burl marks, but all of your philodendron. Watering is also pretty forgiving. We water them when they're between 25 and 50% dry. Let me show you what I mean. To see if my plant is 25 to 50% dry, I'm going to take my knitting needle and I'm going to put it down about halfway down the pot. Now I'm going to mark this with my top finger right here, my pointer finger, and then I'm going to keep my pointer finger in the same spot and press it down into the soil. You're not going to damage any roots, don't worry about that, and bring it out. And here's what I want you to see. I put my probe down 50%, and you can see all that wet soil that stuck to it. That means your plant is not ready to be watered. If this were to come out dry when I stuck it down 50%, that's the time to water your Philodendron burl marks variegated. We fertilize with an organic fertilizer year-round, or if you're using a chemical fertilizer, we fertilize during the spring and the summer months. Just a general houseplant fertilizer is fine. And that is how you take care of the Philodendron burl marks variegated, available right now on my TikTok shop.
I have to do this again because you guys keep forgetting. I'm at the Myriad Botanical Gardens in Oklahoma City. All of these plants are in a beautiful greenhouse with perfect conditions, incredible light, super high humidity, the works. And yet I'm still seeing brown leaves, yellow leaves, leaves with damage, holes in the leaves, plants just not doing very well. Strike that. They might not look very well, but they're still very healthy. Now, since I've been here, I've seen dozens of people come through the doors that paid, the 10, 11 bucks, whatever it is, to get through. And they are enjoying it. They're loving all these plants. They look amazing. They're just in awe. If people are paying to come here and see these beat up plants and loving every minute of it, then certainly you can enjoy the plants that are in your home, even if they aren't perfect. You should be dusting your houseplant leaves, and here's why. Whenever there's a buildup of dust on your leaves, it kind of acts like a barrier between the sunlight and the leaf, and that's going to hinder your plant's ability to photosynthesize effectively. I kind of think of it like when you try to drink a milkshake through a straw, one of those milkshakes that has like a lot of chocolate chips and stuff like that in it. Drinking through a straw just isn't that great. Likewise, photosynthesizing through dust isn't that great. Now, you can just use water and a washcloth if you want, but if you want to be super effective, I like the spray from We the Wild. It's going to feed the leaves and it's going to deter pests. The gloves are also We the Wild. Let me show you how I repot this orchid. Orchids don't have a dormancy period, so anytime the plant is not in flower, you can repot it. We usually do it every 1 to 2 years. It's got a really nice, healthy root system. That came off easily, so now what I'm going to look for are orchid or roots that are papery thin, like this, or that are mushy, and I'm going to cut them off. There's not very many of them, luckily. And this step isn't totally necessary, but it's like whenever I'm doing a project for a plant that's not mine, I try to take the extra precautions right here. All these ones, yeah, this is like mushy, kind of papery thin. I just cut those off. Get all those off. Now, the reason I'm cutting these off is because these roots are dead. They're not doing anything for the plant. And the mushy ones, they could be spreading harmful bacteria, possibly. So it's always a good idea just to get rid of any of that mushy stuff. Getting rid of the really crispy ones, like I said, isn't going to do much for the health of your plant, but it's nice to just get them out of the way so you can see what healthy roots you are working with. All right. Those. All right, now we are left with a nice healthy root system. Spray them down. This is going to help any of that bacteria, kill any of that bacteria that we don't want on the plant. This will be fantastic. You can always use hydrogen peroxide as well. I just don't have any right now, so that's the only reason I am not using it. All right, now we can get this into a pot. Let's see if a 6-inch pot definitely will not do the trick. I don't want to go back into the size that it was in. This looks to be a pretty appropriate size. Now, obviously, you don't have to have it in a clear pot. A lot of times people say, you have to have them in a clear pot. Look, this was not in a clear pot, and the orchid got nice and huge, so it's perfectly fine to do it without. I'm going to be using an orchid bark here. This is actually coconut chips, but it is important that you have drainage holes. That's what's really, really important. Now we're just going to backfill. Backfill there. Backfill there. The goal is to get this orchid bark into all the nooks and crannies. Okay? Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. One, you can use a nice little chopstick or a piece of bamboo, and you can sort of work it between the roots to try to get into all the little air gaps right there. I do that all the time. Or, if you're not new here, slap that pot. That's a good way to do it as well, and it's kind of fun. Lets everyone know that you're repotting in the house, which is good. You don't have to be as chaotic as this either, but I just kind of wanted to show you how easy it is to repot an orchid. I like to keep my crowns above the soil level. This is the crown right here, by the way. I want all of my leaves above soil level. I'm going to water it in immediately after that, but quick and easy orchid repot. The biggest mistake I see when people try to grow houseplants is they're not putting their plant in enough light, especially when it comes to growing plants inside that take full shade outside. Usually if we know a plant grows in full shade outside, the thought is that we're going to put that in low light inside. We don't want any direct sunlight to be hitting the leaves, right? Now this is one of the reasons why I never talk about direct sunlight, bright indirect light, etc., etc. It's because it's very misleading. Instead, I talk about the plant's view of the sky, and in this greenhouse you can see there's a massive view of the sky. Even for your plants that are growing in full shade, they still have this huge, wide view of the sky, which you can't really compare that to your one single window in your house. And actually, when we measure full shade plants outside with a light meter, it usually comes into around 1,000 to 2,000 foot candles, which, if you know, that equals 2 bright light. And that is why I say if you have a bright light plant, make sure it has a wide view of the sky. I haven't watered this thing in about 2 months. Let me show you the maintenance on the BioOrb. Originally, when I planted it, all of these baby tiers were below the leaf area, and you can see they're climbing up right here. Mind you, I've already trimmed them back once. I have a video about that where I trimmed them back a little bit earlier, but all of the begonia in here, every single plant is thriving. Look at that one. I just had to finally cut off all the flowers on this one. So I didn't see it, but I didn't even fully plant it. But like the system is so nice in here that the plant is still just growing absolutely gangbusters. Jade says, please check roots, not drinking water as fully. You got it, Jade. Squeeze the sides of the pot. Oh, the roots are beautiful. Just rough up the soil a little bit. This is total speculation, Jade, so I have no idea what's going on. But somebody establishes a routine. I water this plant every Sunday or every 7 days. And that works for a little while, and you're like, gosh, I'm having so much success. This is fantastic. I just watered every Sunday. And you're doing such a great job that the roots start to fill out and fill out and fill out.
the more roots you have in the soil, the less moisture retaining material you have. The roots are extra drainage. So then the plant starts to dry out a little bit faster. So then all of a sudden your every 7-day watering turns into every 5 days. It's not going to hurt the plant at all to live that way. You're just going to have to water a little bit more frequently. Now the cure to this, if you want to get back to some sort of regularity, is to increase the pot size. Because the plant was root bound, we're just going to bump it up 2 pot sizes. Went from a 6-inch, we can go to like an 8-inch. See, not going up much in size. See the difference? I've mixed together 1 part houseplant soil with 1 part orchid bark and 1 part perlite. We can set our plant in there. I want that to come up to about a 1/2 inch below the total rim of the pot. All right, then we're backfilling. Slap that pot. Let's top it off. And there you go. Took about 5 minutes to repot this beautiful jade pothos. I am so sick of these death plugs that they keep putting in all of our plants. Just kidding, there's no such thing as death plugs. By the way, this is not a white wizard, it is a white knight. They kind of screwed us on this one, right? Okay, look at this. This is the death plug. Death mesh, death plug, whatever the death plug you might think it is, whatever your plant is planted in. This is one of those spongy foam kind of ones, but look, the roots are coming out of it just perfectly fine. And do you think it's having any problem growing? According to my animal research, the answer is no. But inevitably we'll have somebody that's like, I took the death plug out of my plant and now it's thriving. That is what is called a false positive. That's where you do something and unbeknownst to you, you change the circumstances that were actually the problem, usually soil in this case, and your plant started to do better, but it's not a death plug. There are no such thing as death plugs. Okay, signing off. Here are 5 of my favorite beginner plants with explanations to why they're beginner plants. If you're brand new to plants, this is a great place to start. First up, snake plant. You might know this as mother-in-law's tongue. There's no plant on the market that is more close to a fake plant that is actually real. You can put them in bright light, medium light, low light, let them dry out 100% between watering, so they're very low maintenance. Number 2, the ZZ plant. Around here we say ZZ is easy. ZZs are very similar to a snake plant. They can do bright light, medium light, low light, and you let them dry out 75 to 100% between watering. So they're very similar in that respect. The nice thing about ZZ plants as well is if you wait too long to water, this little potato looking thing right at the top of the soil is going to pucker. It's going to wilt. It'll get a little wrinkly. That way you know that you've went too long without watering, give it a good soak, and when it plumps up, that's a good sign that the plant is hydrated. Third place, Aglaonema. This is the red cyan, but all Aglaonema, also known as Chinese evergreen, are fantastic plants for beginners. They'll do well in bright light, medium light, or low light. We let them dry at about 25 to 50% in between watering. However, if you let them go 100% dry, they're not going to die on you. Give them a good soak and they'll perk right back up into this form that you see right here. So a plant being able to adapt to a wide range of conditions is one of the things that we use to determine whether or not it's beginner friendly. Next up, peperomia. This is the Peperomia Hope, which is a trailing peperomia. Now this plant requires bright light. You can get away with medium light as well, but it just won't grow quite as quickly and it won't be quite as compact. The reason this is beginner friendly is because it's tolerant to many conditions, both in terms of light and in watering. We like to let these dry out about 50% between watering. Even if you let them dry out 100%, they're not going to die on you. They might wilt a little bit, give them a good soak, they'll plump right back up. These guys have a huge tolerance for neglect. It's one of our easiest going plants. Our last beginner-friendly plant is for those who have bright light and don't necessarily want soil in their house. That is air plants. This is the Xerographica. The reason this is a beginner-friendly plant is because you don't have to worry about the soil. Yes, it is a bright light plant, but it's also quite drought tolerant as well, at least for air plants. I like to soak these or mist them about every 10 to 14 days. This is one of the only plants that we water on a schedule. Oftentimes, repotting plants is where people go wrong, so when you take away the soil, there's only light and watering to consider. So there's one less factor to worry about. So there you have it, 5 of our top beginner-friendly plants.
They were throwing this orchid away, so I decided to do an experiment. The flowers had died off, so that's why they were throwing it away. The first thing I want to do is get it out of this medium. Since I'm not sure how long ago it was repotted, it's a good idea to refresh the medium at least every 1 to 2 years. This stem actually looks like it might branch. You can see the little baby there, so I'm going to cut just the dead stuff. Now that our plant is done soaking, it's time to remove all the moss. You can use a blunt object like a chopstick, or in this case, a knitting needle. You can also just use your fingers. I try not to so much because I do this so often. My hands can get pretty dirty, which my wife does not appreciate. What you're seeing here is long fiber sphagnum moss, which is a really common planting medium. Let's remove all the dead roots. Papery thin, no good. Plump, excellent. Sanitize your scissors with some hydrogen peroxide, some alcohol, or even some bleach, and cut away all those roots that are no longer living. That transition didn't go as planned, but that's all right. Okay, I'm going to remove the rest of the moss using a little bit of water shaky, shaky, shake method. You can see there's quite a bit left over. Orchids like a lot of airflow to their roots, so I poked a whole bunch of holes in this plastic nursery pot to provide that. And here's the experiment. Charcoal. This is horticultural charcoal. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was at an estate sale where they had an orchid greenhouse. Some old-timer that had been keeping orchids forever had all of his orchids in charcoal, so I've always wanted to try it. Kicked up a little dust in my face, no problem. In theory, it should work as long as we can get enough air down to the roots, and I actually kind of like the way it looks. A little spooky. This calathea is struggling. Let's see what we can find out. Oh, it has a plug. So it does have a drainage hole. It was just plugged. So the water had nowhere to escape, and the plant got root rot. So now we need to clean off all the soil. I'm going to spray this down. I'll be right back. All right. We got it all cleaned up. You want to see? Yeah. 3% hydrogen peroxide, not diluted. Spray it on the roots. I do not wash it off afterward. This kills that rotting bacteria, making sure it doesn't spread. That's why we do it. Now, we measure the size of the root ball. It's about 3 inches across, so I'm going to go up to a 4 or a 5 inch pot. Got my calathea soil here. All right, here we go. Get that soil settled in around the roots, almost there. Now going forward, I'm going to recommend this customer put the plant in bright light and water every time the topsoil dries out. She wanted it back in her pot, but I don't know. We'll see.